This is Aaron Turner from Sumac and Hydra Head Records, and you are listening to the New Scene podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the New Scene. I am your host, Keith, and we're back with another brand new episode. And on the show this week, we have Otto Wicks-Green of sleepmakeswaves. They're an excellent post-rock band out of Australia. I discovered them sometime around 2017-ish, and I've been a fan of theirs ever since. They have a new LP out called It's Here, but I Have No Names for It. And I think it's their best record yet. And this is a very nice conversation. It spans a lot of topics, and it's coming up shortly. We also have our Artist Spotlight interview for the month with John Jr. from M.U.T.T. They're a new band out of the Bay Area, and they have an excellent new EP out. It's called Dirty Deeds. So we'll be talking to John about the band and the EP, so make sure you stick around for the whole episode. That's all coming up shortly, but first, here's how you can support the New Scene. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at New Scene Pod. Reviews. Give us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And if you write a review on Apple Podcasts, I'll read it at the end of the show. Shirts. We have shirts for sale at Death Wish Inc. T-shirts and a long sleeve shirt. Go pick one up. It's a great way to support the show. And you can always email me at newscenepod@iodinerecords.com. And don't forget to support Iodine Recordings. Her Heads on Fire have a new LP coming out. It's called Strange Desires, and it's out July 19th. You can check out the new single, Why Are We Alone, right now. Iodine signed a new band called Drought, and their EP is up now for pre-order. Also, sign up for the Iodine Noise Cult. You'll get every vinyl release that Iodine has coming out this year. And don't forget to support our sponsor for the month of April, Revelation Records. Revelation Records has an unbelievable history in the scene. So many bands that we know and love. Judge, Texas is the Reason, Fall Silent, Quicksand, Inside Out, Farside, Elliott, so many bands. And they continue to put out great releases to this day, from favorites of ours like Paint It Black, Spaced, Be Well, Drain, and Calling Hours. Make sure you pick up Ray Capo's new book, From Punk to Monk. It's available now via revhq.com. The new LP from Planet on a Chain, called Culture of Death, is available now to order. And don't forget to pick up the new LP from Spaced. It's called This Is All We Ever Get. Head over to revhq.com. They've got an unbelievable selection of merchandise, records, t-shirts, everything. Follow Revelation Records on Instagram at Revelation Records, and follow RevHQ on Instagram at RevHQ. Okay, so now we are going to speak to Otto Wicks-Green of sleepmakeswaves. Enjoy. All right, we are here now with Otto Wicks-Green. Otto, welcome to the show.
Hey Keith, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, Otto, it's great to have you here. You know, I've been listening to sleepmakeswaves for a while now, and you've got an excellent new record coming out, which is called It's Here, but I Have No Names for It. And it seems you are also influenced by video games, you know, much like myself. So I'm excited to talk about that. And look, we're going to get to all of that. But first, I want to ask you, how are you doing today?
Well, thank you for asking, Keith. I'm doing fine. It's a sunny day in Sydney, unseasonably warm. We've had the third hottest summer on record, and it's continuing right into the fall, or autumn as we call it here. Today's not so bad. I'm just managing all of the kind of real life stuff that I have to do to pay the rent here in Sydney, with the excitement and preparation and artistic stuff of actually releasing, you know, our first proper album in a very long time. A little out of practice, but excited to be back into that world again.
That's awesome. Yeah, you sound like me. You know, I've got the day job. I've got a lot of stuff going on. And then at night, I've got bands and podcasts and all kinds of things going on. It's hard to strike the balance sometimes, right?
It is hard. It's a labor of love. And I think, not to get too hectic too early, but I do feel a deep sense of solidarity with fellow artists and creatives and visionaries, who care about stuff that isn't particularly well rewarded in our current environment, in our current economic reality. And I feel more and more that it's become more and more precarious to devote yourself to this stuff, to squeeze it in around the edges of everything. So yes, that's very much defined my relationship with art over the last 15 years and my relationship with Sleep Makes Waves. And it continues to, that it's a double life, and one that I hold, with a lot of love, but also some trepidation sometimes.
Yeah, there's days where I'm like, would I be happier just watching movies and playing video games again? I did that for a long time. But the answer is no, because look, there was a lot of years where I wasted a lot of time and didn't do anything good. And for the last, let's see, 5 or 6 years, I've been focused. My life has adjusted itself in a way where I can devote a lot of time to my artistic pursuits and then still work, right? And I've never been happier. I want it to be this way. How about you?
I would love to be able to do artistic stuff with more financial security, and to do that and to pursue that as a full-time career. But I've always been someone with one foot on the ground of the kind of more mainstream, secure world that, especially in Sydney, and I think potentially as well in New York, with a serious rental crisis here in Sydney, everything's just getting insanely expensive. And I've seen so many artist friends ultimately drop off and disconnect their relationship with art entirely, with music or whatever it is, because they couldn't maintain the kind of compromises to their quality of life that are sort of necessary in many cases to pursue it as a full-time career. So I've always tried to balance the two and do the day job. I work 4 days a week at a corporation. I'm a UX designer actually in my day job. So I design apps and websites and stuff like that. And then I try to keep the two worlds fairly separate. I have the Friday off to devote to, songwriting or some of the more bureaucratic administrative things that being in a band requires these days. You have to be so many things at once. And then, of course, the weekends. So yeah, it's not an easy balance. And sometimes I find that it can get quite overwhelming and things drop off. Things like, your relationships with other people. If you're so devoted to building and pursuing something in particular, that kind of has to come at the cost of things. You have to prioritize constantly. And that can be challenging, especially in an environment in the music industry where it is more and more precarious and it is harder and harder to make a living. It is difficult in a world where music is essentially expected to be for free for most people these days. So it's a labor of love.
It certainly is. It's got to be harder for you too, right? All the way down there in Sydney. I mean, if you're in the US, that's a whole market. And then I guess you can go to Europe fairly easy, but Australia is far away.
Yeah, it's the industry with one hand behind its back of boxing, we have an enormous, massive land down here, and it's very sparsely populated. So going anywhere outside of one city usually requires about 800 or 900 kilometers of flying or driving. It used to be driving for us, thankfully, not so much anymore. But that population is not very dense. So the market just isn't big enough. We had this insane experience in 2015. We went to China for the first time. We actually went back in 2017 and we played the biggest shows of our career. And we are not a big band, but those were still the biggest shows of our career because the population is so dense there. I mean, it was just and also our promoter was awesome, but we're playing to this many people in these big cities. Yeah, it would have been easier, I think, if we'd started in America or Europe. And you have that kind of landscape that's so rich, full of towns and people who are keen to see bands. I'm sure there are challenges and issues everywhere, but yeah, Australia is tricky. It costs a huge amount to get out of here. There aren't that many people who live here. And yeah, you're far away from everything.
If you wanted to fly to New York, like next month, how much would that cost? Like 1,500, 1,600?
Well, it'd be about 3,000 Australian dollars, which I reckon would be
Oof.
about $2,000 in greenbacks, as you call them over there.
Oh my
Yeah,
God.
you got to fly to LA. It takes about 14 hours, and then you got the LA to New York flight, or Dallas. We can fly in through Dallas if I'm feeling that way inclined.
That is, yeah. I mean, well, I'm curious. Did you grow up in Sydney, around Sydney?
I grew up 2 hours north of Sydney in a lovely area called the Hunter Valley, which is famous for its wine growing, actually. Australia does some wines quite well. We do really bold, big reds like Shirazes and Cab Savs. We do those quite well. Hunter Valley is a wine growing region. I grew up in an old little town there. My parents were academics, economists and sociologists. It's just probably why I ended up with the name like Otto. But actually we all moved as a family to the west coast of Ireland for 6 years in the year 2000. And so I was there for 6 years until 2006 before we moved back, and I moved to the Big Smoke here in Sydney.
What were you doing in Ireland?
Well, my dad got a job there as an academic. He was at the university in Galway. And so all I was doing was going to school and slowly but surely discovering my taste for heavy metal and learning guitar on a guitar that was incredibly pointy and ridiculous, especially for a kid who was quite thin and had glasses and braces. But at the time, learning Raining Blood by Slayer and playing it at a youth cafe with several of my other ne'er-do-well friends seemed like the right thing to do.
Yeah, when I got into this music, right, there was a thing where every heavy band was covering Raining Blood. And I remember I learned just the one guitar part, like and I felt like so cool. I was like, wow, I can do that?
Oh, yeah. Learning guitar made me feel like anything was possible. I mean, it was like something I could control all by myself. And I basically taught myself for the first several years. It was something that if I put enough work into it, I could feel the results. And starting off with the basics, but with that passion. I think when you find something you're that passionate about and you can hit that flow state of just pure focus, and you feel that sense of progression as you can get the songs into your hands, like learning the songs of other bands, particularly Metallica songs at the time for me, was really important in my guitar development and my approach to songwriting. It gave me a lot of insight into how those guys kind of pulled their songs together, and just it made me a technically better guitar player. At the time, the technology was much more rudimentary. These days, we're so lucky with the amazing array of educational resources for everything, whether it be learning guitar or learning chess. It's all there online in video format, easy to consume. Back then, it was all tabs, all on the internet, on these questionable websites, and some of the tabs were wrong. Yeah. And you'd have to like pick through the dross and find the ones that were good, but over time, the technology, then you got Power Tab and Guitar Pro, which was like, it would play the tabs as MIDI. And that was like revolutionary for me. I was like, oh my God. Because I used to have these books of tablature as well. And it was like, I just still can't quite get it. But when you could actually have the tabs being played, man, that opened the world up. And I think my guitar playing got better.
I didn't even know that was a thing. I remember the really old tab sites where someone would transcribe it on what looked like, Windows Notepad, and I'm like, yes, this I can work with. Okay. The tab books are like too complicated. There's all these notes and letters in there, and I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, you need the Rosetta Stone to decipher that stuff.
So what is some of your trajectory with music? It sounds like you got into heavy metal pretty early on.
Yeah, it was a community. I think I loved the music, and the first time my friend who I met at a soccer camp in Ireland, my friend Neil, who was a really cool guy, and I was this dorky sort of Australian kid, but I went to this soccer camp in Galway, and I met this guy called Neil, and he showed me like heavy music. He showed me Metallica, Slipknot, and then even some grunge stuff like Nirvana, and some weird stuff like System of a Down. And through Neil, I met a whole bunch of other kids who liked this music. And at the time in Galway, I think everyone was sort of looking for a bit of an identity to ascribe themselves to. And we were known as the moshers. It was like this sort of youth subculture, and we wore our black hoodies and all of that. And so it was a community of people who didn't quite fit in. And I found that very comforting to feel a part of, because we fit in with each other. But then there was the obvious other side of it, which was that I really loved this art form, this more abrasive kind of uncomfortable nature of thrash metal. Ireland, it felt like, was a little bit delayed in terms of the music that we were listening to. Like, as far as I can recall, we weren't listening to bands that much that were coming out right then, which I suppose in 2000 would have been a lot of nu metal. But I only got into bands like Deftones and stuff much later. At the time, it was all this 80s stuff, all this 80s and early 90s stuff, but it was amazing. It was like a revolution to me. And from there, I started playing in bands. I joined bands and I formed bands, all of which have some of the most questionable names you could possibly imagine. But I earned my stripes at these gigs, playing band comps, playing local DIY gigs around Galway. And then by the time I came to Australia at age 16, I was really keen and a little bit more experienced and ready to start joining other bands and pushing that forward. It was around 2007 that on an internet forum for another Australian band called Ne Obliviscaris, I ended up meeting this guy called Tom Binetter, who was the guitarist at the time of a band called Sleepmakeswaves, who were in Sydney. And they did this instrumental post-rock thing with a laptop, but with low-tune guitars. And I was just in love. I just thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever heard. And so I went to a few gigs, and I loved the band. I was a huge fan. I loved the combination of big, heavy, thundering climaxes with these really peaceful, quiet sections. I love the integration of the organic guitar and drums with the kind of electronic artificial laptop. And so after a few years of getting to know these guys and following them around, when Tom Binetter left to pursue other interests in the end of 2009, the band actually hit me up and said, would you like to do what do you call it? A tryout. What do you call it when you try out a band? It's not a rehearsal.
Yeah, tryout.
Tryout, yeah. Do you like to try out? And I said, well, yeah, that would. I remember it was like a life-changing phone call. My mother remembered seeing me when the expression on my face changed, when I got the call from the band asking if I wanted to try out. And so I did, and then I joined in January 2010. And then Sleep Makes Waves has obviously become the sort of defining and most important part of my musical career.
Was that the first post-rock band you had heard?
I think I'd probably checked out bands like Mogwai or This Will Destroy You or Explosions.
Okay.
And then there were Explosions in the Sky. And then I was just getting into Isis as well, who remains like probably one of my all-time favorite, maybe my all-time favorite band. I was really into Panopticon and Oceanic. And so the fact that Sleeps were doing this like cool low-tuned baritone-led stuff really resonated with me.
Yeah, I almost got into post-rock. It's almost like fate. I had never heard any of the music before, and I saw that Mogwai were playing in Philadelphia, where I lived at the time. And without ever having even heard them, I just had this sensation. I'm like, I need to be at this show. So I bought a ticket, never having heard them.
Wow.
And then I put on Rock Action, and I was like, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. Oh. And then, Mr. Beast came out. This was the Mr. Beast tour. So then I heard that, and that was life-changing. And then I found Explosions and Caspian and This Will Destroy You and all those bands. And that was what I primarily listened to for just years and years after that.
Yeah, there was so much good music coming out in this world. And I mean, obviously post-rock is such a kind of catch-all term now to describe everything from Slint and Television and Tortoise in the 90s all the way through to, And So I Watch You From Afar or Sigur Rós or these bands. And you can see what they have in common. It's this rejection of song structure, but the embrace of rock instrumentation. You can see the common thread, but the amount of diversity in the sort of output of this genre is awesome. And at the time, I remember finding it so exciting, hearing what was capable with guitars, because as I was learning my Metallica songs and all these bands that were from quite a long time ago, I remember feeling some sense of frustration or like wistfulness about like what could be possible. And it was when I got into kind of the post-hardcore scene as well, like At the Drive-In, bands like Isis, and that you started hearing guitars being pushed, and the idea of guitar music itself being pushed, and new frontiers starting to open up. And I think the fact that Sleep Makes Waves are as old as we are was important because, it's hard to start after that. And I think to continue to keep reinventing, originality is such a precious thing and it's really hard to do. And I think we got on right at the end of like this wave and we were lucky to have been able to do this as long as we have. But it is hard to continue to reinvent what guitar music sounds like and what it is. And I think it goes through phases of being relatively more and less popular. But yeah, getting the chance to actually join a post-rock band was a dream come true, or at least one that had some early success in the DIY scene with some releases that they'd done online through a net label. And knowing the guys and knowing the band and having seen them a lot, I was sure that this was what I wanted to do. It was, I count myself very lucky that it turned out the way it did.
So when you're back in Australia, you're into all of those bands that you mentioned at the drive-in, ISIS, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I was slowly starting to expand my horizons. When I first got back, I remember it was like into prog stuff. It was into Opeth, Dream Theater, and hearing this like, especially Opeth, like the songwriting there, the interesting approaches to tonality and song structure and the abrasiveness of metal with a more kind of ambitious, ornate arrangements. I loved that. But yeah, soon after that, again, like when I went to uni, it was all these like changes in my environment where I would like change it up, go from one place to another, and then meet new people who would introduce me to amazing things. And that's kind of been the story of how I got into all of these things. But by then, I was looking at more kind of angry, hardcore stuff. And those moods and those expressions were resonating with, I guess, this 19-year-old who, had a pocket full of dreams and loved hearing the screaming.
Yeah, I started out discovering the craziest music at the time: Converge, Coalesce, Dillinger Escape Plan, Cave In, that big metalcore thing that was happening in the late 90s. And then I found all the emo bands, and then post-hardcore, and then post-rock. And I've jumped around a lot. And now that I'm old, I just listen to everything that I like because, it doesn't have to all be one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time it was, again, like a real sense of belonging and a sense of identity for me, that listening to these bands with other people who did, it was like if I'm at a party and I'm like, oh God, who do I talk to? The social anxiety of like, oh geez, everyone here is looking like they're busy in conversation. Who do I talk? It was always like, if I can find someone who liked that kind of music, it would be like awesome. There's immediately enough of a common ground established between us that I think we're probably going to be fine. Like, not all the time, I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule, but most of the time I found that if I met people who were into this kind of music, we would get on. And I loved that about it. It was like almost deliberately a bit of a kind of an offshoot from the norm. And
it was very tribal. Like,
right.
I don't know what, I guess that's just the mindset at the time, because I had these friends who were into the music and they welcomed me into the circle. And for the first time I had friends and, like a group, right?
Yeah.
So like I got really into the music and I dropped a lot of the stuff I was listening to before. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And I don't know. I just remember being dumb about it. Like I would like preach to people online and be like, no, what you listen to isn't real music. Like this is real music. You should listen to this. And if I went to parties with like normal friends, I would they'd be listening to like Sublime and stuff, and I would put on just the most guttural, crazy stuff, and
hell yeah,
everyone
brother.
would get really upset. And I was just like, no, man, you don't know.
how to win friends and influence people.
Yeah.
Well, look, it was an interesting realization that I kind of had around this time, that most people don't really care that much about music, and
Right.
that's just how it is. Like, we are weirdos to the extent that we live and breathe it, and that like
Right.
it meant this much to us, and maybe to some of the people listening to this who might be nodding their heads, like that realization at one point that this is actually everything, that this is so fucking important, and you'd live or die for it. I had that realization around that time, especially getting into the post-hardcore stuff, that it wasn't just a thing that I would listen to. It was actually like how it made me feel, and how it made me feel connected to the world, made the world feel safer and more bearable. And I think my relationship with it has changed as I've gotten older, and it's less urgent and it's less of a white knuckle grip now. Now it's more like I've had all these experiences, and the place that it has in my heart is very much one of memory and of like looking back over these times and the intensity of youth. I'm similar to you, Keith. Like these days, I listen to pretty much everything. I was at the Taylor Swift show last week, and it was awesome. And so I'm not as elitist about like what is good or what is bad. I've opened that way up, and I've acknowledged, and I acknowledge that like you can be good at music in a variety of different ways. It was just that for a period of time with a group of people, a certain style of music made me feel like everything was going to be okay.
Yeah. That's a good summation there. Yeah. Like, yeah, I just used to have music on all the time, constantly, and I don't anymore. I don't know. The pandemic killed that for a while, and then I would just be on YouTube and Twitch all the time.
Yeah.
But now that we're a few years removed from that, I've kind of cycled back. I'm listening to a lot more music. It's better. It's better that way. I'm finally over like the isolation thing. And now I'm going to way more shows, which I'm happy about. I can't believe how many times I bought tickets to shows and just didn't go. And then I look through the tickets on my phone and I'm like, wait, I had tickets to that and I didn't go? What the hell was I thinking? So it just took a while to snap out of that like pandemic mindset for me, and a lot of other people too. Like I forget it's not just me. Like I talk to other people and they're like, yeah, a lot of people are going through that. And I'm like, oh, well, I forgot.
Oh, well, I think we're all still unraveling the collective trauma of those 2 years and trying to make sense of it. And it'll take more time to, it's kind of, we've moved on to some extent as a society from talking about it. But I think spiritually and mentally, we're all still very much grappling with that period and what it meant for each of us. And so, it wasn't easy. And I think we need to give ourselves permission to acknowledge that. But yeah, I think there was a few things that converged around that time. Like we talk about the attention economy, the idea that there are companies that exist nowadays that their goals, even though they create different products, are to have your attention, whether it's Twitch or YouTube or Netflix, whatever it is. They want you to spend your attention on that thing, social media, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is. And so back when we were in our heyday of listening, perhaps it was that there was less options. There was less choice, and music felt more salient and more important and more accessible in that respect because it wasn't competing with a million other technological devices that have been designed by experts to keep you engaged all the time. It's hard for music to compete. You can see bands have had to pivot to becoming videographers as well as songwriters. Everything has to be video. Everything has to be visual. The music can't just exist on its own terms in an economy of these kind of weapons grade attention devices that are ready to hijack your attention and keep it. It's hard for music in the same way that it's been hard for books, but both are so enriching. And if we can get over our desire for the short-term pleasure of the dopamine hits that we're served up on a platter constantly, we can find that a lot more moving and deeper experiences are available. I do wonder if those experiences that we had with connecting with communities and those tribes that you mentioned of listenership and fandom and involvement in this DIY scene, I wonder if that would even be possible on today's terms with the younger generation, or if that's a thing of the past, and if kids are connecting over different things and that kind of level of identity around a certain genre. I wonder if that's kind of a historical artifact now, which is kind of an interesting question and somewhat a sad one. But yeah, our relationship with listening to music will have to change as we get older. Our tastes change, our spare time changes. And I've read somewhere as well that like people just generally tend to listen to less new things, especially once they hit their 30s. And so I try to be deliberate about listening to new stuff. And I must admit the digital streaming platforms, for all their issues, they have made that really easy and good. Like the Spotify Discover stuff is incredible. And I've been put onto so many amazing new bands through those kind of algorithms.
Yes, for as bad as Spotify is, the radio, or when your album runs out and it just sends you to a bunch of similar bands, that's great. That's how I discovered you in like 2017 or 18.
Wow, how about that? Well, I guess the system works on some certain aspects.
Some aspects are okay. Yes. So, what were gigs like in Australia? Like, what were you seeing? Hardcore bands, post-hardcore bands? What was going on down there?
Well, back in like the late 2010s, when I was sort of just starting to go out to them, when I was of age, legal drinking age here is 18, I was going to a lot of shows, a lot of locally organized shows in Sydney. At the time, Sydney was different. And this is probably less interesting for international listeners, but Sydney's changed a lot in that since that time. And maybe it's a similar story to other cities, but we used to have an enormous amount of small to medium-sized music venues that could operate totally fine in that capacity. And unfortunately, since then, we've seen a concerted effort by developers and by property kind of industry to sort of rinse out and gentrify a lot of the suburbs that had these grungy small pub venues and turn them into more bland, homogenized, livable spaces for normies. And in the process of doing that, the costs of running small venues skyrocketed. The option to replace a live music capacity with slot machines, or pokies as we call them here, was all the more and more attractive from a financial perspective to our small venue owners. And it was very hard for the dedicated few to maintain profitability running live music. It just literally got run out of the city. It's only been in the last few years following COVID that as a society, we finally sort of indicated that enough is enough, and that a city without this live music culture is one that we don't want to live in, and one that ultimately and hilariously and ironically, property values will ultimately suffer for if you create a city just built to be sold to rich people without any actual culture. So back then, this is a long-winded way of answering that. Back then, things were really good. There was a lot of small to medium-sized venues. It's where I saw Sleepmakeswaves for the first time, and where I got introduced to a lot of the other amazing post-rock or prog bands that were around at the time. I remember this, most notably the band Meniscus, who I first saw around that time in 2008 at a small room called the Excelsior Hotel in Surrey Hills in Sydney. And it was, to this day, probably one of the most mesmerizing and awe-inspiring shows I've ever seen in my life. And I've loved that band ever since. But we had a much healthier community of young bands who were putting themselves out there, and a much healthier community of people who just went to shows. Even if they didn't know all the bands, you'd always have rooms that had people in them. And these days, that's a lot harder. And these days, it's very hard for bands to get started. And I really, really feel for bands who are trying to get started now. I think all bands are doing it tough in Australia, trying to fill rooms and trying to sell tickets. There's been this insane polarization where bands that are doing really well occupy like 90% of the attention and money of the music consuming public. Taylor Swift came out here and there was just like unprecedented demand for millions and millions of tickets. Fred again announced some shows recently, and there was like 100,000 people in the queue looking for tickets to a show. Like, these are insane numbers in Australia. And so you have like people getting invested in the hype cycle for certain artists, but I worry we've forgotten to nurture and enrich young artists. And we need to do that to get to those artists to the point where they can be successful. So yeah, back then in the late 2010s, it was great. There was heaps of people going to shows, heaps of bands performing, and bands prepared to take those long drives up from Melbourne to Sydney or up to Brisbane and to play for people on the weekend. I remember it probably with rose-colored glasses, but very fondly.
So you're in Sleep Makes Waves. How was it performing in that band in the beginning? Did you just play around Australia and the various places you just mentioned?
Yeah, well, at the time, that was all I thought would even be possible. It was just like, yeah, I'm going to join this band and we'll play around Australia. It was really funny because I didn't have a baritone guitar. So a baritone guitar is a longer guitar, which allows you to tune the guitar to lower tunings and maintain string tension, which is necessary for a band that tunes to drop A, which for guitarists listening will know it's a very low tuning. I just had my Les Paul, which is hilariously like kind of like a blues lawyer dad guitar, like it's a sick guitar. I love it, but it's like such a kind of like Jimmy Page ass instrument. And I had this Les Paul and I had this little Vox AC15, which again is like the least metal amp imaginable. And I tried to pull together tones with this sort of stuff, but I think it was actually kind of cool to not immediately go down the road of making a guitar sound the same as everyone else. And so I did put a lot of emphasis on effects pedals to run through what was a fairly clean amp platform, and then like using and experimenting with different distortion pedals to get that heavy sound. And I think that doing it that way sounded pretty cool. I think there's no real right or wrong way to do stuff as long as it can sound good. And so I had this fairly rudimentary setup, and we started playing shows locally around Sydney, a couple just to get me kind of used to the feeling of playing. And also it was around this time that we started as a unit discovering sort of how our live shows should feel. And it was around this time that we got a lot more physically expressive with the shows, and in the style of bands like Dillinger or At the Drive-In, who would put on these concerts where they were just going nuts. And we were all in our I was in my early 20s, the guys were in their mid 20s, and we all just started thrashing around on stage like our lives depended on it, because it just felt like the right thing to do. It was never something we discussed. It just sort of started happening that way, that with the riffs we were writing and the energy we were putting out. And so it gave this show that was really physically involved, really big, but yeah, no vocals. And then we started getting some offers to go to Brisbane and Melbourne, and God help us, we would drive up. We'd have to get up at 5 a.m., get in the car, drive all day. It would take, with a couple of breaks, it would take 10 to 12 hours to get to Brizzy. We'd play the show, and then we'd sleep on someone's floor, some other band we were playing with, and then we'd drive back the next day and then all go to work for the week. And we did that for the full year in 2 years, really, 2010, 2011, until we got our first album released. And So We Destroyed Everything, it was called, in 2011. And from there, we also connected with our manager, Mike Solo, who was an instrumental, no pun intended, but an instrumental component of helping us get to that next level, which involved getting to Europe on a pocket full of chewing gum and safety pins, and and then also getting invited to play at South by Southwest in Texas, which was huge for us.
What was the first show you played outside of Australia?
The first show, that's a great question. The first show we played outside of Australia, let me think. Did we go to South by or Europe first? Gosh, I should really know this. Maybe it was it like going to Dunk Festival in Belgium, or was that 2012? Gee, Mike's gonna, if Mike's listening to this, he's going to be pulling his hair out and yelling at the screen.
There's always one guy in the band who remembers every single thing.
Yeah.
And then,
the
rest is kind of like...
the rest of us have very little idea. But it would either have been a show in some club in Europe. The first Europe run we did was really DIY, where the routing was pretty torturous and nonsensical. Like, it would be like, we're playing here in Paris, and then you're driving all the way down to like Vienna, and then you're driving all the way back to Lyon. And it was just this insane trigonometry all over Europe, involving these relentlessly long drives, very little accommodation, usually floors, promoters' houses. That was rough as hell, but we were always told if you just keep going back to Europe, it keeps getting easier. And it sort of did. It did. But it was probably a show on that tour, I think. And it would have been in some little rock club, maybe in some unknown German town, but where we would meet these incredibly enthusiastic people who would come up to us and say things like, "Oh yes, you are my third favorite post-rock band from Australia. I have 5 vinyl. Would you like to sign, please?" And we'd be like, "Oh, absolutely, sir."
I love that. That's nice. You played South by Southwest too.
We did, man. What a time. That was so thrilling. It was really exciting. It was 2012, and there was all these amazing bands playing there, of course. This Will Destroy You, who we met for the first time, our friends, and So I Watch You From Afar from Northern Ireland. They were playing. A bunch of other Aussie bands. And we played this venue called Headhunters at about 12 a.m. And we'd flown in, and we were jet lagged as hell. And we just had to set up and play this show on the patio at Headhunters. But amazingly, a bunch of people showed up. It was jammed, actually. It wasn't like a huge room, but it was jammed. There was people hanging off the rafters, up the staircases. And it was so fun to get back to our kind of DIY roots on this stuff. Like, we use a fair amount of production for our shows these days, and we're lucky enough to have a wonderful crew that help us out. And so we've kind of lost a little bit of that DIY ethos that we started with. But back then, man, it was just us and a guitar tech / TM. At the time, his name was Mike Tyson. Sorry. Yeah, Mike Tyson. Mark Tyson. I'm thinking of the boxer, Mark Tyson. And he helped us out a bunch. But yeah, we just had to set it all up ourselves and play the show. And it was, I remember that show probably the most fondly of all of our shows, for what a strange, chaotic blur it was. But I think that show represented the true spirit of Sleep Makes Waves. This idea of it's 4 dudes from Australia who are going to show up out of nowhere, set up some amps, some Fender Twins, and rip the roof off the place without much else. And we were able to do that for a while, and hopefully we still are. But back then, that was really what I think set us apart and what we really wanted to focus on.
Was South by Southwest the first US show?
I'm trying to remember. We strung a few shows together, but I think it was. Oh, no, we flew into LA, didn't we? I think we flew into LA and played a show there with, what were they called? Our friend Signal Hill. A couple of the guys from that band have another band. I've forgotten the name of it. But anyway, played with those guys and borrowed their gear. And none of our gear worked from Australia, by the way. It was like a cavalcade of errors of like all the things that we thought that we didn't realize we needed to do. Like we knew there was voltage differences. So whenever an American band comes to Australia or vice versa, you guys use, I think it's 112 volts in your like wall sockets, whereas we use 240 volts. And so you need step up and step down transformers if you're bringing gear for each country, unless it's got like a flexible kind of power inputage. So we were ready for that. But what we didn't realize was at the time, some of our computer gear, so like the laptop or the sound card, there was like a factor of like what hertz it needs to be, like what wavelength it needs to be. It was like it needs to be 55 to 60 hertz. I can't remember the details, but I remember it meant that things didn't work. And we had to frantically go around trying to troubleshoot and fix things. And the whole thing was actually really stressful. But by the time we got to Austin and South by, I think we pretty much figured it out.
Signal Hill, that's a great band too. They've been on the show.
Oh man, they were one of my favorite post-rock bands back in the day, and they still are. And they actually came out to Australia in around 2009 before I joined Sleeps and played with Sleep Makes Waves. And so we got to meet those guys, and that relationship has persisted ever since. Like Tim, the drummer, is one of my good friends. Like I don't see him as often as I'd like, but like I'll see him every time I go to LA. And then the other dudes, I think they're all over the world now in England and New York. But I believe they're working on some new tunes. So really keen to hear some more stuff from Signal Hill.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I think they're in LA and New York and the UK now.
Yeah, a truly international band, but lovely, lovely dudes. Love them to
Yes, I like hearing that all the post-rock bands are friends and hanging out too, or some of them at least.
It might be post-rock, but it's not post-friendship. That stuff's still continuing.
So by the time you played those first gigs outside of Australia and Europe and South by Southwest, it sounds like people outside of Australia knew you, right?
Yeah, we worked with some really good people in the early days. So the band first released their music. There was this 2-track EP they released on a net label called Lost Children. And this was before I was in the band. And that did really well online. A bunch of people connected with it. And I think it was actually, funnily enough, used in a video about the movie Twilight. One of the tracks was used in this video about Twilight, like a fan video that went super viral on YouTube. And a lot of people in the comments were like, what song is this? What song is this? And so people kind of discovered the band through that. But then also in the early days, there was, Mike Solo and the Birds Robe Collective in Australia. And then Monotream Records released our first album in the UK and Europe, which was really great because they had an amazing lineup of bands at the time. I believe including 65 Days of Static for a while there, and a bunch of others. But Monotream were awesome. And so we connected with some really good people early on to help kind of push the band out there. And then we just played, man. We played and played and played and got just like brute forced our way into people's brains by being at their towns. Often enough that people were like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go see this band again. So it just took a lot of work. But we worked also with some good people who helped get the word out.
How do you balance it with work? Oh. You know, like I went fully remote in 2019, and that allowed me to finally do a little more than I was doing before. But I mean, how are you doing this in late 2010s, 2012, living in Australia, traveling internationally? How do you do it?
Dude, I can't believe what I did. Like, it's insane. I remember having these conversations with Mike where I'd just been invited to some grad program at a Big Four consultancy, and I was starting out, and all the other grads were like so all work focused. But really for me, I was really band focused. And so I was just pretending to be like work focused. I still had to work hard and show up and do my job, but like my spirit was out of the building. And so being surrounded by everyone else was like, I felt like a wolf in sheep's clothing, or a sheep in wolf's clothing is probably a better analogy. The thing is, the companies I worked for thought it was cool to have a rock dude in the team. And they would use it in their recruitment. They'd be like, well, we've got a really diverse team. You know, we got a rock star. We got this and that. And I'd be like, sure. If that's what it takes for this to keep working, then so be it. But they were surprisingly cool. And I have to give a shout out to the bosses I worked with at the time. I was at Deloitte in Sydney, and the partners I worked with were super, super supportive. They're thanked on the liner notes of a couple of the records we did because they let me take the leave. I remember my manager sitting down with me after I was freaking out about the South by Southwest invite, which took place weeks after the sort of graduate program commenced. And I was going to have to go and ask for 2 weeks leave to do a tour in the US. And I remember Mike just telling me, look, they're not going to fire you for asking. And so I asked, and they said yes.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, I have that same mindset. I'm afraid I'll get fired for even asking, but I remember asking my boss, like, hey, I might join this band and we like might tour sometimes. Like, you know, if I'm doing work from a van, but I'm connected still, is that okay? And he's like, yeah, we'll work it out, all that stuff. So I was happy about that.
Awesome. Yeah, I was surprised at how flexible people were when they realized it was for something that was really important and kind of cool. Like, I think work should allow everyone to pursue their dreams. And I think people work better at their jobs if they have side hobbies that they're pursuing. I think everything actually makes it better. But I was pleasantly surprised at how I was able to be given that flexibility early on. And then after that, I changed my working relationship and actually set myself up as an independent contractor. And I worked like that for the majority of the 2010s after the stress of having to apply for leave constantly. So I was just set up as my own company. And rather than asking for leave, it was more like, I'm available to work from here to here. I'm unavailable here. And that transition to being more in charge of my time was such a relief because I didn't feel like I was letting people down. And that did weigh on me. So being able to be like my own contractor with UX design in an industry that was kind of growing, that was also a stroke of luck.
That's great. Yeah. So Sleep Makes Waves has a new album coming out. It's called It's Here, but I Have No Names for It. It's coming out April 12th on Birds Robe Records, right?
That's right, yeah.
All right. Now, I have to say, this is my favorite record of yours I've heard.
Oh,
yet.
I'm so happy to hear that.
It is amazing.
Oh, man.
It is amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Let's talk about this record. First, I need to talk about this. There's one single out there now, Super Realm Park, and I read that the main riff and synth was inspired by F-Zero.
Yeah. It's funny because I played the game a bit when I was a kid, but it was also like playing as Captain Falcon in Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
And it was just that energy of like a kind of nostalgic 8-bit racing feeling that we wanted with that synth line. This kind of pulsing, arpeggiated, nostalgic retro vibe, but blended with these kind of post-hardcore guitars. That was sort of where the inspiration came for that song. And then pulling it together was a lot of fun, especially that outro where we were kind of figuring out how to end it. We were umming and ahhing. And I think it was a classic Otto and Alex kind of tag team. And some of my fondest memories of songwriting with this band are when I'm in a room with Alex and we're going back and forth. Like he'll come up with an idea. It was actually a hi-hat, off-beated hi-hat thing that ding, ding. I can't really do it. You know, for those listening at home, I'm playing drums with my hands right now. But he was hitting the bell of the ride in an offbeat way. And I picked up on that idea with this little kind of ding, ding riff at the end of the song, this kind of quarter note sort of pulsating little double stop lick. And then out of this kind of drum beat and lick, we just thought, let's just do this wall of noise out the back. And I'm really looking forward to playing it live. I think it'll be really fun because we tried to just add as much low-end information as possible.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm imagining some of these songs live, and they just sound massive, and the production is so good. We even have some vocals on this.
Yeah. Adding vocals is a thing we've been kind of playing with for a little while. We did some in that collection of EPs we released in the pandemic. I'm sort of naturally a singer, I think, even more than I'm a guitar player. And I approach my guitar playing as a singer. It's like a big focus on melody and how the melodies fit together. And so with some of the songs we were working on, doing some vocals just felt very natural. And that's always the way that we want to do it. Is I never want it to feel contrived or like we're bolting on vocals to a post-rock band. The songs should feel like a foundation where the singing kind of grows naturally out of that. And so for the songs that have vocals on this record, that was very much the case. In the case of Terra Future, it was like actually using the vocals as a loop and creating like a kind of digital loop out of vocal sounds, but sort of disconnecting it as an actual human voice thing, and then letting a real human voice emerge at the back of that song. And then with the title track, it was just a very natural thing for, a song that I wrote really about grief, to sort of get some words in there about that.
Writing about grief, did something specific happen, or was that just the subject we chose?
Yeah, my mother passed away during the pandemic, so there was a lot of writing that I did just to sort of stay sane at that time, and a bunch of songs that didn't make it onto this record, which we will release in the future. There's a lot of writing that we have, a lot of songs that we have that didn't make it onto this. We had to be quite selective in getting this down to just fit on one vinyl record. But a lot of songs about that pain and that loss did come through in that time. And that was, I think, the one that felt best with that collection of songs.
Yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry about your mom. What was it, COVID related, or what happened?
No, she had a chronic lung condition that she'd been living with out of complications from getting measles when she was very young, back in the 1950s. And it led to a condition called bronchiectasis, which is a sort of a permanent lung infection, which got worse and worse. And yeah, it was very, very, very horrible. It was just about as bad as you could imagine, as someone's lungs slowly stopped working. But we went through that, and music again was something that I could use to express some of that pain.
Yeah, it's good to have. I don't know. There's been periods of my life where I wasn't connected to art or creating anything, and those were lonely, empty times. No outlet except things that are unhealthy. So I don't know. The cycle I'm in now, I have a lot of things I'm doing that I enjoy that are healthy: podcast, bands, close-knit communities and friends and all that stuff. So that's the stuff you want to lean on during the difficult times.
Absolutely. And I think music, as we've discussed, is so closely related to communities and to those close-knit friend groups. It's all one and the same. I think ultimately pivoting ourselves towards the sun, pivoting towards love and what that means. And, music, a lot of it is love. It's about building art that you connect with, that you're in a flow state with, that is an expression of something some say isn't even you. Some say it's the source itself, some unnameable force that you tap into when you're writing your best material and that you have to open yourself to. And I don't think you can tap in unless you're open to that. And I think, that said, maybe I'm thinking of counterexamples. I'm sure a lot of great music has been written on drugs, but probably not to the well-being of the people who are doing it. But no, it is hard, man. Like we all go through this stuff, and I think trying to keep on the right path and to look after yourself and to choose things that are good is a constant decision that we all have to make and live with.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of talented people who happen to be doing drugs, but were also really talented and wrote some great music. I was a drug guy for a long time, and when I look back now, it was a huge waste of time. And, whatever I'm doing now is way better than whatever I was doing before. So I'm going to say drugs, waste of time. Do not need them to fuel creativity. What do we think of that?
Fair enough. I think there's two things. Like, first is I'm skeptical of all things instant gratification. I think any instant gratification, as a general rule, is going to leave you wanting more. And I think denying yourself the instant gratification in favor of a longer term goal is harder by definition. You have to deny that. But that's the stuff that you look back on your year, or you look back on whatever, your decade. And the things that you're most happy about are generally the things that you had to work at. I think that our relationship with work is a little clouded because so often work these days is done for the profit of others. It's for companies. It's for, profiteers. And I think it's easy to get hoodwinked by a sort of argument that says, well, you have to work hard and be part of the team so that you can make money for me, the boss. And I'm skeptical of that and of that kind of propaganda. That said, real hard work people want to do. I believe innately in humanity's capacity and desire to work hard at things that we believe in. I think that as people, as normal people, that's all we want to do. And I think that is what makes us happy. What makes us happy is doing good work. And at the end of a hard day, looking back and going, hell yeah, I did all that work. And the other thing that makes us happy is hanging out with our friends and family and loving. And if you can get those two things together, then man, there's not a thing in the world that can stop you. That said, occasionally I have found some psychedelic drugs to be quite fun in the context of creativity. Especially the non-addictive ones, psilocybin, LSD, those kinds of things at small doses, which are non-addictive, can be pretty cool. But that said, I would never advocate on a podcast for unconditional drug use. I'm just open to the possibilities of some of that stuff in paving new pathways in your brain, and the science sort of backs this as well, to unlock new forms of creativity. If you're using them constantly, like anything, it's not a good thing. Balance in all things.
Take it from me, kids. I did unconditional drug use for a long time, and it doesn't work. Doesn't work. We have to do the hard work, like Otto was talking about. That's where the real fulfillment comes in. I figured that out eventually.
I'm happy to hear it. Yeah, I think anything to its extreme is usually not a good thing. And I think in the case of drugs, if you're using them to solve big problems, that's a problem.
Yeah, it's going to turn into a real big problem. Do you still play F-Zero? Have you played the new one?
I'm a bit embarrassed. I haven't. I think with video. So I wish maybe you'll have to chat to Alex at some point. He's much more of the gamer of the band than me, and he's got a very sort of sophisticated patrician knowledge of the video game industry and of like trends and things in the industry. He can talk about them with a lot of experience. For me, the F-Zero thing was more about capturing a sense of nostalgia for the 90s, that feeling of going to your friend's house and turning on the N64 and the nature of the graphics and the colors and the sounds. It was like a happy memory. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get across to the extent that I have in that song. At least in the original demo that I brought to the table that Alex and Tim did a huge amount of work on and improvement on. So like all of our songs, it was a collaboration in most parts. But to the extent that I brought what I did, it was about capturing that nostalgia, that feeling of careless, wistful, freewheeling fun in those afternoons in the 90s on an N64.
I love that. Yeah, especially considering it sounds like you didn't necessarily keep up with it, because Nintendo 64 was a big time system for me and my brothers. There was a lot of 4-player action going on all the time with us and the neighborhood kids. It was good.
Yeah. I loved the social aspect of those early console games. I was never allowed a console when I was really young, and so I had to always go to friends' houses. And it was funny because me and my brother had the trampoline, and my friends all had the consoles, and each of us all thought like the other one's option was way cooler. Like my friends wanted to come over and play trampoline, and all we wanted to do was jump on the N64 and play GoldenEye or Mario Kart or whatever it was.
The downside of having academics as parents. That's no video game consoles.
Great callback. That's exactly it. Yeah, a very cerebral upbringing. They'd seen enough of that, and they somewhat naively wanted to keep the screens limited when we were growing up. I think these days that ship has well and truly sailed.
They lost.
All that generation lost to the extent they were fighting a war against the digitization of everything. I'm sorry, boomers. It's happened.
Well, I like when this happens on Twitter, and sometimes, some older person will be complaining about kids on phones, and then someone will post a picture of like all the old people. It's like this old picture of everyone on a trolley, and every single person is reading a newspaper. And then I'm like, yeah, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah. Well, I hope we can still remember how to read as a society. It'd be a shame if we lost that. But
yeah, I think you need to read still, right? Because you got to know how to like create a login for the subscription service that's going to take $5 from you for the rest of your life, and we'll never own anything again. And but it'll be controlled, all the media we see and what we have access to and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, unless they can somehow just pump that information directly into your body through some kind of like vibrating system of pads that just like let you know what's going on. We'll see. But yeah, as a representative of a proud band of nerds, I can say that, yeah, reading is cool.
Yeah, I like to read. When's the last time you played in the US?
2016. So 8 years ago with our good friends, The Contortionist. I don't know if you know that band, but they are amazing. They are such a brilliant prog band, but that doesn't do them justice. Like it's real prog music, but for me, it like without the kind of typical sort of wankery that sometimes you hear in prog music.
Right.
It's very focused, clever compositions, all tied together by this most beautiful, soulful singing of Michael Lessard, who in their last record, Clairvoyant, sings and writes so poignantly about grief and about loss and about the nature of being alive in a world that we don't really understand and that has spiritual resonance that we're trying our best to access. As musicians, they're absolutely brilliant. And as songwriters, one of my favorite bands. I'm really hoping that we'll see more music from The Contortionist at some point in the future. So we've had the pleasure of playing with them on that tour across America and then again in Australia where they came and opened for us. The other bands on that tour in the States in 2016 were Monuments, who are a really sick gent band from the UK, and Entheos, who are doing amazing these days. That's Naveen Kopovais, who is an ex-drummer from Animals as Leaders, who's just an incredible talent, and Cheney, his partner, who sings, and she's fantastic. So it was a really cool lineup. Like, it was a lot of fun. We went all over the States and played pretty much everywhere. I had a blast.
Nice. How long was that tour?
Man, that must have been at least a month, maybe 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. It was a lot of shows. I remember it going on and on and on, in a good way. We were lucky enough to be on a bus for that one, which is like so insane because tour buses are pretty luxurious. But a guy that we used to work with and knew in the music industry back here in Australia, Adam Perry, he left the country and started a tour bus company called AP Touring in the States and gave us a good deal on an old 95 Prevost bus. And it was the coolest thing ever. We were just in heaven. So shout out to him. He owns like 15 buses now. He's completely killing it.
When you fly over here for shows, do you have to rent gear from somewhere? How does that all work?
Yeah, often we'll rent backline is usually how it goes. So things like drum shells and amps and like cabinets and stuff we'll have to hire. I believe we actually have some gear in storage in the States that our label we kind of share with other bands and they can use and we can use. So some stuff we have in storage, some stuff we'll hire, and a bunch of stuff we'll just have to bring.
What does your stage show look like in modern times? You mentioned that it's grown over the years. Do we have projections? Do we have a lot of lights? What do we got?
So yeah, we're constantly looking for new ways to lift the experience, not just for new fans who kind of want to check us out, but for all the loyal old fans who've been around since day one. Like, we want to keep giving them something new. So we're leaning a lot more on production and especially lighting to continue lifting that. We know that the sound is in really great hands. We've been lucky to have wonderful sound engineers over the years, including one of our first guys, Brett, who was brilliant. And then lately we've been working with a guy called Kevin. And we know that sound and what people are hearing front of house is going to be great. And that's ultimately the most important thing for all of us, is to make sure that everything's clear. The layers that are so dense and textured are all kind of stratified, and you can hear every instrument, all of the detail in the laptop, but with this pounding kind of drum sound that our drummer Tim provides. He's a brilliant drummer, Tim Adderley. I think criminally underrated in Australia and in the world, but he's fantastic. And I think a big part of the show is just watching him play. You know, he's the best one. But getting the sound right is priority number one. After that, yeah, we've been working with some great lighting engineers, most recently Zoe Spratling, who in our last tour around Australia built an enormous version of our band logo out of lights that kind of changed color and created beautiful patterns that went in line with the songs we were playing. And on these next couple of tours, we'll be working with her again and another guy in Australia called Jake. I'm still figuring out with Jake what this next tour is going to look like, but we're going to invest more in a light show that hopefully will be that lifts the show and the music that we're playing. I think with each album cycle as well, we tend to try and focus on certain colors and certain moods. With Made of Breath Only, it was this deliberate venture into the Arctic and into the Antarctic, into the frosty Arctic wastes. So it was a lot of whites and blues. With this new album cycle, it's very much inspired and relates at least the aesthetics around the corrosion of copper and brass, this idea of time changing things, the kind of golden hue of brass changing slowly to teal and green, the verdigris. So I'm keen to see how we can bring that to life across all of our kind of assets, whether it's like the live show, the studio photography, the album art. That's sort of gone into the thinking here.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes. I like the sound of the Arctic whites and blues and all of that. And I always have much love for Made of Breath Only because that's the album where I found you.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. It's kind of, Alex is fond of saying that album is like our And Justice for All, Metallica's 1988 venture into really technical, like complex songs. And then we kind of agreed that we wanted this record to feel more like our Black Album, where it was like a return to more punchy, in your face, accessible stuff. I don't know if it ended up like that. I mean, this record's still pretty out there, so you can be the judge of that.
No, I would say it's more accessible, and I mean that in a very good way. I mean, look, this is my new favorite record of yours.
Oh, man. Yeah, I'm so happy to hear that.
This is it. I can't wait for everybody to hear this. So everybody, I think it will be out by the time you hear this episode. So make sure you check it out. It's here, but I have no names for it. Is the record. I love it. I love it. It's my new favorite record from Sleep Makes Waves. And what else? You said we're planning a tour. Is there anything we can announce, or are we still working on where we're going to play? Like, what's happening?
So we are playing in the States. We are coming back, and we are playing in Brooklyn, Keith, in July. Let me just quickly pull up the dates. I should probably have this on hand. But yeah, we're playing around Australia initially to launch the record. We'll be playing in Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane at the end of April. And then we're heading to Europe in May to play at Dunk Festival. We played there a couple of times over the last 12 years, and it's been wonderful. And then our biggest ever headline show in London at the Garage. So Dunk is May 11. The Garage show is May 12 in London. And then in July, we're heading over to the States, and we're kicking off the American shows in Brooklyn at the Meadows on Tuesday, July 23rd. We'll be heading to Cleveland with If These Trees Could Talk, who are an awesome post-rock band. That'll be Wednesday.
Love that band.
Yeah, right on. So we're playing with them in Cleveland the next day, the Wednesday, July 24th. And then the big reason that we kind of got to head to America comes next, which is this festival called Post Fest in Indianapolis, with a lot of great bands, including This Will Destroy You and So I Watch You From Afar. And I believe Caspian are playing as well. I have to double check. But,
I think they're playing, yeah. If I could still handle going to fests, I would go to that one. The lineup is always amazing.
Yeah, we're super psyched with this. And we're actually playing 2 sets. This year marks the 10-year anniversary of our album Love of Cartography. So on the 25th, we'll be playing our regular new song set. And then on the 27th, Saturday the 27th, we'll be playing Love of Cartography in full as a special treat.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I will be at that Meadows show. I'm happy to hear that you're playing here. And it's very convenient for me because I live within walking distance of that venue.
Oh my God, can you believe it? I'm here in Sydney chatting to you, but in a few short months, we'll be playing around the corner.
It's so weird.
That's awesome. I love it.
It's so weird and it's so awesome. See, that's one good thing about technology is I get to interview all these bands where it probably wouldn't happen otherwise. Or we'd have to do it on the phone, which, doesn't sound as good.
Yeah. No, it's got its advantages, as well as air travel.
Well, Otto, I just want to thank you for coming on the show. Again, I love the new album. I love the band. I'm excited that you're going to be here, and thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
A pleasure, Keith. It was great to chat to you, and look forward to meeting in Brooklyn.
And there you have it, Otto Wicks-Green. I loved that conversation. Very pleasant conversation, spanning many topics. Very interesting to hear about the ins and outs of a band from Australia, which is just another world away. And I'm happy that they continue to put out excellent music to this day. I'm happy that they're playing so close to me in Brooklyn and that I'll get a chance to see them. And again, make sure you check out their new LP. It's excellent, excellent stuff. You know, so much good music has come out already, and it's only April. And I remembered to start cataloging all of my favorite records of the year early to make it easier on myself once I do my top 10 at the end of the year. I've got a lot of stuff on there already, including the new record from Sleep Makes Waves. All right, so now we are going to speak to John Jr. of M.U.T.T. M.U.T.T are a new punk band out of the Bay Area. They've got an excellent new EP out called Dirty Deeds. So here is John Jr. of M.U.T.T. Enjoy. All right, we are here now with John Jr. of M.U.T.T. John, welcome to the show.
What's up? Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's great to have you here. You know, there's exciting things happening. M.U.T.T has the Dirty Deeds EP coming out on Quiet Panic. We're going to cover that. We're going to get to know you, John. So tell me, when does M.U.T.T get started? How does M.U.T.T get started?
M.U.T.T got started technically in 2020, towards the end. Me and a couple of these guys were in another band before called Culture Abuse that ended in July 2020. So later that year, took a little break from music, you know, but later that year, started writing some tunes. We didn't play our first show until November 2021 because of the whole, you know, thing that happened there. Yeah, like I guess you know, we recorded the Bad of the Bone LP in October 2021 and played our first show the next month. So yeah, I guess 2021 is when we started for sure.
Yeah, so is this your first time fronting a band?
Yeah, well, I mean, besides like high school, you know, but yeah, definitely this is like legit first time fronting a band. You know, high school doesn't count because it's all fun and games at that point, but
yeah, this is more serious now.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and it's weird because I didn't ever want to do that. I like headbanging. I like rocking out, and you can't do both when you have to sing. So, and I'm not a singer. I would never say I am a singer at all, but you know, I get the job done.
So Culture Abuse ends. Like, when do you decide? How do you decide you're going to start writing music and try to front this new band? Like, how long did it take?
It took a few months because I wasn't sure if I was actually going to really want to do anything, but then the urge kind of came to want to play music again. The pandemic was crazy because a lot of sick bands, they had stuff done before, but you know, a lot of good music came out of the pandemic, I must say. So it got me excited. Yeah, it got me super stoked. I wanted to be back in there. There's something about playing shows and touring that it's what I've always wanted to do. I love it. So I didn't want to really give that up. I mean, this band doesn't tour as much as Culture Abuse did, but that's just because we're still kind of starting out. So hopefully the opportunities come and we'll be able to do that more.
Right. So you're working on this stuff at home. I guess the pandemic is still in full swing, right?
Yeah, huge.
What are some of your influences for this band?
Good question, man. I love the simplicity of a pop song. There's something about it just being simple and easy and fun to listen to that I'm inspired by. So it's crazy. There's some haters out there that are like, "Oh man, this is the same chords the whole song." It's like, but that might be sick, dude. And I don't know if it's not, every music kind of hits people differently. So I'm excited by that type of stuff. So like the Ramones were a big influence. I will be honest. I haven't listened to like the whole discography. You know, I know that they're huge, they're legends and stuff like that, but you know, they were before my time. So the songs I do love are super inspiring. Just the fact that they can be that simple and so memorable is huge. And you know, to tag some friends, like Angel Dust is a big influence for me. I love that they mix like punk and hardcore and pop and stuff. And I think that that's a way cool way to play music, because it can be exciting and aggressive for like the kids that are there. And it's like, it's still hardcore where kids can jump on each other, but it's punk and it's pop, because you can sing along and you can enjoy it like in the car with other people that might not necessarily love aggressive hardcore music. This band Webbed Wing was really big for me during the pandemic. Those are members of Super Heaven. Taylor Madison is a real great songwriter, and super inspiring for sure. So, you know, it's like the homies that inspire me, you know?
Yeah, and I like what's going on with M.U.T.T too, because it's not too much of any one thing. It's not just hardcore or just punk. It combines elements from all those things. You've got some hardcore in there, you've got some classic punk in there, you've got some good rock and roll attitude in there. It's a very nice mix of all those things.
Thank you, man. Yeah, it's definitely super rock and roll influence. I have, for the last 10, 15 years, I've been super obsessed with the big giant rock movement that happened in the 80s with like Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and stuff, and like heavy metal bands. And I've done a lot of research. I've read a lot of books. I watched a lot of documentaries. So M.U.T.T musically is like a punk band, but aesthetically, dude, like we're like a rock and fucking roll band. Like obviously, you know, if you just take a look at the song titles and stuff, it's like I just thought it would be real cool to kind of pay homage to some of like the greatest songs of all time by taking their song titles and writing my own songs, like my own version of that, you know?
Was it hard for you to become a front person and write and play and sing and do all that stuff? Like when I did that for the first time when I was, I don't know, 36 years old, and it was pretty hard, you know, because I did backups in a band, right? But I didn't sing a whole song and play, and it was hard. But I found just through going to practice every week and just doing it, I mean, you just get better. How was it for you?
Yeah, it's the same. I'm actually 37 years old, so about the same age. Yeah, 36 is when I started doing both at the same time. We have one song on the album, Downtown Boy. It's like a different time structure. So I'm strumming different than the melody and the vocal pattern goes. So that's a pretty hard song to sing and play. But yeah, just a lot of practice. I practice at home a ton. And it's a scary thing because I'm constantly thinking, okay, I'm either going to forget the words or forget the chords, and they're, God forbid, they both happen at the same time. But
you know what I do for those weird parts? I'll play and like my mouth is on the mic, and when my mouth is on the mic, I just look down at the guitar at when I'm playing for like the really hard parts, and it probably looks weird, but I'm like, what else am I going to do? I got to get this done.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've thought about like maybe just not playing and singing and having the other guys kind of filling in or something, but no, I think I can make it work, and we're rehearsing a lot in order to make sure that these songs are just as good live as they are recorded.
That's excellent. Have you guys played out yet?
Any tours?
Like any shows, anything?
Yeah, we've been doing a lot of just local California stuff for the last 2 years or something.
When was the first show? Because I know the pandemic was still really kicking in early 2021, but I guess in May, June, shows started happening. Like, when did you guys get out and play?
We played our first show November 2021, and it wasn't really meant to happen. It was like we had some friends locally that were in a band called Whole Hog, and they were putting out a record, and that band started during the pandemic, and they put out their first LP like April 2020. So they're like the week of their record release show, it got canceled. And so they wrote another record during the pandemic. And then when they were getting ready to release that second record, they wanted to do a show. Me and the singer became pretty good buds during the pandemic, hanging out a ton, making art together. And, he's sick. Jason, Addicted to Chaos on Instagram. If you want to check out his work, he's dope. But yeah, they asked, he heard about this band I was doing. He was like, does your band want to play? And I was like, oh, sure. So we played our first show, November 2021, and then didn't play again until like April 2022. But then once we did that, we just started playing like every month and doing a lot of shows locally in SF. We've been to LA and down to San Diego, and yeah, mostly California, but really stoked to get these new songs out in order to play out more.
Do you guys live in San Francisco?
2 of us do, and two live in Oakland.
Do you live in SF?
Yeah.
Where at?
I live in the Tenderloin, which everyone is quite afraid of, but it's not that.
Yeah.
It's not so bad. I mean, there's these neighborhoods in every major metropolitan city, so it's just kind of how you walk around, you know. Like, people are afraid because they look afraid, you know. So obviously they're like primed for the picking. But if you walk with a purpose and you got that look in your eyes that says, don't fucking look at me and don't fuck with me, then, you know, that's not going to happen. So I've
exactly,
knock on wood.
Exactly.
I've been quite lucky, but you never know. And, you know, I'm on my guard, so it's all good. I ain't afraid. It's all good.
Yeah, I love it there. In the Tenderloin specifically. See, I used to have a major drug problem, and San Francisco is the one place I managed to buy real drugs on the street very easily. So I was very happy about that.
Wow, that's good, dude, because I've bought some drugs off the street that were not drugs at all, and I paid way too much for them.
Yeah, that's happened too. But I was by UN Plaza one day, and I saw some people hanging around, and I was like, hey, you know, and then it got it done just like that.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, that's how it is now. Dude, honestly, because of the pandemic, wearing masks and covering your face like a thing, now drugs are everywhere, because it's like, it's weird to tell someone they can't wear a mask, because there are still people that, you know, are afraid of coronavirus.
Right.
So as a business owner, I feel for them, because people definitely, they go in there with their face covered, and you don't want to be the one outed for being like, take your mask off. You know, I don't care about any pandemic, you know, you can't wear a mask. But so it's like, these people can kind of get away with a lot of crime right now, especially in this neighborhood right now. It's kind of a ghost town, dude. A lot, like where you were, like UN Plaza and stuff, and like, you know, Westfield, like the I'm blanking on it for some reason, but like, you know, Powell Street, that whole downtown area, it's all closed up. There's no retail. And the mayor's like, you know, it's just because people buy stuff online. And it's like, no, it's because every day there's like a group of young kids who just run into these places, clean them out of all their most expensive merch, and dip, and then they sell it on the street. And that's how, you know, people are working these days. It's gnarly. So I've seen it in person. It's crazy. It's scary sometimes, but it's like, God damn.
I've seen videos of that, but it must be crazy seeing it in person.
It's wild. It's more wild in Oakland, I feel, because Oakland, it's kind of a lawless city right now. But in SF, it's wild, man. This is the first time I've ever lived, quote unquote, downtown, and I didn't even know I lived downtown until someone told me, and I was like, oh, sick! I live downtown. Like, I'm gonna enjoy this. And yeah, there's, you know, I mean, a lot of restaurants, great food in this neighborhood. A lot of stuff is still going strong. But if you go down to where the shops were and stuff, there's nothing there. Where the tourists go, it's pretty bleak.
Wow. Well, yeah, when I was there last, I was surprised how out in the open everything was, like in terms of drugs and just craziness, because you didn't see that too much here in New York City at the time, but you see it a lot more now, actually.
Yeah, and you know what? It's weird, because that's one of the reasons why I decided to move to this city in particular. I grew up in Massachusetts, and I always had my eyes set on California. Wasn't sure where. I thought Southern California was going to be my spot, but once I came here, like, and saw graffiti happening live, like on the street, and people enjoying it, you know, as an art form, and like going to Dolores Park, and dudes are walking around selling acid and selling shrooms, and, you know, like, not so much the dark stuff, but like, you know, smoking weed out in public. I was like, dang, this is way cool. I like this vibe, you know, and, you know, in this neighborhood, it's not, you know, people aren't smoking weed. They're smoking fentanyl, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, but I definitely prefer Northern California. San Francisco is the only place I've ever been to that I was sad to leave when I came back here to New York City.
And the weather is incredible.
It's the best.
I am the type of person, I like wearing a hoodie. I like wearing sleeves. Layering is cool in my world. So
yeah,
growing up in Mass with the summer so hot and humid, and even in New York City, when it's so hot like that, it's impossible. You can't cool down. So I'd rather it be a cool 60, 65 and layer up for the nighttime when it gets colder than I don't want to be that hot ever again.
I'm with you completely on that. I wear pants year round. I wish I didn't ever have to wear t-shirts. Yeah. I hate the hot weather. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So M.U.T.T has the Dirty Deeds EP coming out on Quiet Panic, February 23rd. Yes.
Yeah. Big time.
How'd you hook up with Quiet Panic? That's a good label.
That's a funny story. I have a friend, Joey Camillo. Shout out Joey. He plays in this band called Fearing. When we recorded the LP, we did it for fun, not sure where it was going to go. And Joey, for a while, was running like a little vinyl pressing thing. I can't remember the name, but it's like a cheaper version of vinyl, and you can like do them at home or whatever. He had like a little press, and when we were getting ready to play our first show, I was like, well, I kind of want to have some music that people can take home. So I was thinking of doing just a 7-inch, and just get like 50 copies. So I hit him up, asked him about it, and he was like, well, send me the songs. So I sent him the songs, and he really liked them, and he was like, these are really good, man. Like, I don't think you should waste your money on getting like a bad vinyl record made. Like, you should, shoot for the stars. And I was like, okay, well, I don't know. And then he was like, I got some friends running a label right now, Quiet Panic, and they're looking for new bands. I think they might be stoked on this. Do you mind if I send them, the songs? I was like, absolutely. And that night I got a call from Mike and Ryan, and they're like, yo, we love these songs. We'd like to work with you guys. If you guys want to put this out on vinyl, let's do it. And so that's how our relationship started. And they've been very good to us. They're a small label, so they, we're all learning together in a way, but yeah, they've been so helpful and so nice and kind. And they really give the artist, full reign on how things look, how things turn out, how things are produced, things like that. So, and they're good about steering us in the right direction, because they also kind of like, they're in management as well. So even at the time when we were putting out that record, they wanted us to go back into the studio, record some songs to promote the band before the LP was announced. And, I was like, okay, yeah, can you guys throw us some cash? And they're like, well, honestly, you should just pay for it, because then you'll own everything. If we pay for it, then we'll own it. And I'm like, that's a good point. So
nice of them to actually say that.
Yeah, exactly. It's great. They're great. They're awesome to work with.
Yeah. And it was so the Dirty Deeds EP recorded by Jack Shirley.
Oh yeah.
He's like the legend out there. I knew him, but I didn't realize it. He's recorded Deaf Heaven. He recorded Jerome's Dream, The Gray In Between. Yep. And that's when he really got on my radar. And then I saw that he recorded you, and I was like, man, this guy's doing it all.
He is a Grammy-nominated producer, dude. So he's on our side. It's great.
Yes. How was it recording with him?
Amazing. He makes you really comfortable doing what you're doing. And luckily for me, I've known him for 20 years. Before ever recording with him, we were longtime friends. And I think because of that, I think he's like this with everybody, but because of, our relationship in the past, he's very upfront about how things sound, and, he gives you good advice, and because his name's on it just as much as my name is. So he wants to make sure it turns out as good as possible. And, he's just a good dude. Super nice. He's got a beautiful studio. He's very accommodating. He's not afraid to tell you if something's bad and to do it better. And he does it in the nicest way possible. Where I've worked with some people where they're like, can somebody else record this part? This guy's not getting it. And it's like, you feel like dog shit after. So
yeah, I was going to ask if he like produces and kind of guides you in the right direction. It sounds like that's a yes.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say he produced it, because when we book time with him, he's very efficient. And I'm saying that as in like, he's like, let's just get this done. So, because I brought it up to him like, yo, let's do it track by track. He's like, dude, you should just do it. Like, and I get it now. We're just we're not we don't need to do it track by. That's wasting time. And so that's what I mean by he's efficient. He's like, just do it live and just play it good. And it's like, you're right, we can do that. We for the style we're going for and for how it sounds, it's like, honestly, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference if we did it track by track or live. So let's just do it live and cut to the chase.
Yeah, and it sounds great.
Thank you, man.
So let's talk about what we've got coming up. When can we see you? What can we announce? I think this is coming out at the end of April. So everyone, the record will be out by the time you hear this. So definitely check it out and pick it up, and tell us where we can see you.
Hey, you can check us out on the road. We're definitely going to be playing out, supporting these songs. So in July, I think the dates are the weekend of the 25th or something like that. I don't have a calendar, not looking at a calendar, but we're going to be doing New York City, Boston, Philly, Long Island. And we're going to be doing those in July. And then definitely a ton of California shows. And then we're going to be hitting the Pacific Northwest as well around the summertime. So we're going to be out and about, man. We're looking to pick up some dates. We're looking to play shows with some bands, and we're looking to support these songs here. So
awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to more, and I can't wait for everybody else to hear the EP. And I just want to say, John, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for supporting bands. Thank you for doing these things and taking time out of your life to give shout out to somebody else doing their thing.